Some games seem on the surface to be no different to other games of the same type, and yet manage in some hard-to-define way to be great, said Crash Magazine in issue 3, landing Chuckie Egg a rating of 80%. Returning to the game now, after so many years, this appears to be the greatest summation I can find of the game. That statement still rings true. It's actually quite astounding just how smooth the game manages to be, sat in the shadow of generation upon generation of games that have come since. Chuckie Egg is outstandingly precise in how it plays. It'll seem quaint to describe the way your brim-hatted egg botherer smoothly grabs a ladder as he runs past, but the range of movement and the snappiness of that movement is exactly why people love the game, and why they still love it to this day. It is, at its heart, an arcade title, and while many Spectrum games tried to nail the arcade feel, there were very few that could match the game feel aspect of a giant, dedicated cabinet. That's not to say arcade conversions to the ZX Spectrum were all awful, although some were, but the chances of them being a one-to-one recreation was slim at best, and home computer users were pretty adept at accepting the limitations of their homely machines. Chuckie Egg wasn't a conversion though, it was a game that took influence from its arcade counterparts, and its developer, Nigel Alderton, clearly understood that a good arcade game needs to feel good in the hands. It has to be precise, and it has to be snappy. Remove the ability to complain about the controls, provide your players with a skill set they can get to grips with, and you can watch that skill ceiling rise higher and higher as players become an expert in the field of egg poaching. For those who haven't played Chuckie Egg, the premise is simple when boiled down to its core components. Collect all the eggs, avoid all the enemies. It's Burger Time, it's Donkey Kong, it's Load Runner, it's also none of these things. Chuckie Egg was, on release, often referred to as not being an entirely original game, but to call it out for its similarities to other titles is missing the point entirely. Chuckie Egg is an original title with arcade influences that plays incredibly well and stands distinctly apart from its inspirations. I don't want to belabor a point, but I'm going to. Everything that makes this game as good as it is in the way that it feels to play. Snapping to ladders by holding multiple directions works perfectly. The arc of your jump is simple to learn but tricky to nail exactly without practice. Jumping from a ladder is possible. There's no fall damage. When you hit a wall mid-jump, you bounce backwards. If all of these things sound like obvious choices, then you haven't played enough games from 1983. The remarkable thing about Chuckie Egg is that in terms of its mechanics, there's almost nothing about it that feels antiquated outside of the graphics. I've played platform games released in the past 10 years that don't feel as nice as this in the hands. It's not all praise and niceness though. I do have some issues to level at the game, and those are mostly centered around level design. This is more of a preference than a complaint, but it needs to be said. After the first couple of levels, which feel open-ended and classically arcade, the game begins to descend into puzzle platforming that requires specific pathways, awkward jumps, and waiting for stupid birds to get out of the way of stupid ladders. The pace of the game drops dramatically from freeform parkour to the equivalent of waiting for your turn on the park slide while a fat bully sits at the top, refusing to move. With only a handful of levels, this may seem like a relatively big complaint, but it's not enough to sour the overall experience. Mostly because, on completing the 8 levels on offer, the game starts over and the gameplay is completely switched up. Instead of avoiding annoying flamingos or emus or whatever the hell they are, you're now avoiding a dive-bombing goose or duck or whatever the hell this is. This seems like a relatively minor switch up, but it completely changes how you play through the same 8 levels again. No longer can you really sit and contemplate the stage because this terrifying shitehawk is constantly gunning for you, meaning you just have to keep moving. Trick him into going one way while you go the other, penciling out a panicked dot-to-dot map in your head of where the eggs are and how you're going to get to them. It is exhilarating, and once again, I'll bang on about the controls, but if the game didn't control in the way it does, this gameplay switch-up simply would not work. It would be a frustrating nightmare world, but instead it's a frustrating sex dream about ducks. Admittedly, I thought that metaphor was going to work, but it's made me look like a sex pervert. I apologise. If you're good enough to complete these 8 levels again, which I'm not, there's more on offer. Playthrough 3 sees you avoiding both the dive-bombing hellbird and the ladder-hogging penguin beasts, and if you manage to get through all 8 levels again, they add even more birds. And then if you do it again, all the birds start moving even faster. You start the game with 5 lives, you get an extra life every 10,000 points, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is Chuckie Egg. It's a classic in every sense of the word. A game that is not a classic in every sense of the word, however. Just look at this horrendous cover. Bring the original cover back in. Why? What possessed them? Chuckie Egg 2 is a game where the adage, "don't judge a book by its cover," doesn't necessarily ring true. You certainly can judge Chuckie Egg 2 by its cover, specifically when compared side by side with the original. See how these two things are nothing like each other? Well, the same is true of the contents on the cassette as well. The game will become addictive to the Jet Set Brigade, who will want to know their way around the chocolate factory, but overall, I didn't find it very addictive. But not bad either. A nice progression. Crash Magazine, issue 17. 81%. Bring the Chuckie Egg score back in again? What the hell, Crash Magazine? Okay, look, forget about Crash. Clearly they were having another off day. The game looks and feels roughly the same, but much like Manic Miner morphed into Jet Set Willy, Chuckie Egg 2 expands on the original idea of a single-screen platformer and turns itself into an exploration puzzle collection nightmare, spanning a massive 120 screens. If you consider that alone, Chuckie Egg 2 is already 15 times bigger than its predecessor. To combat the sheer size of the game, and for other reasons we'll get into, a save facility was provided so that you could continue with your adventure at a later date, or, if you were a clever sod, you could save your game at a particular point, go exploring, map things out, reload your game, and go on a different route. Starting the game, you're introduced to a few mechanics that the previous game did not include, namely the ability to pick up and use items in order to solve puzzles. Your first quest, therefore, is a tutorial of sorts. Head down a ladder, walk left, head down a ladder, walk right, head down a ladder, walk left, head down a ladder, walk right, climb up a ladder, grab a bone, head down a ladder, walk left, climb up a ladder, walk right, climb up a ladder, walk left, climb up a ladder, walk right, climb up a ladder, walk right, drop the bone in front of the dog, and now you can begin the game proper. Why did I say all of that out loud, you ask? Because it's boring. Incredibly boring. And it's a good way to really hone in on the main reason I don't particularly like Chuckie Egg 2. The exact same complaint I laid at the original's feet. Level design. Where Chuckie Egg's level design had some stages that I didn't particularly enjoy due to their more restrictive nature, Chuckie Egg's 2 level design is often featureless. Take this screen for instance. Ladders, platforms, one route, 2 enemies that are incredibly easy to avoid, an item on the floor that actually isn't an item and it'll just kill you if you touch it, nicely signposted by not looking any different to anything else you have to pick up, thanks game, and then there's this pickup, whatever it is, here. Nothing about this level is interesting. There's no real challenge, there's no real agency, and this design is typical of the game as a whole. In comparison to Jet Set Willy, for instance, where specific rooms would give you a heart attack just remembering them, for better or for worse, Chuckie Egg 2's level design is often plainly simple and largely uninteresting. This is offset by the overarching task that you have to deal with, which is convoluted at best. You need to put together unbranded Kinder Eggs, basically, and to do that you'll need to collect an insane amount of items. Each toy requires 8 pieces, and each egg needs to be made using cocoa, milk, and sugar. So that's 11 pieces altogether, carried one at a time. Are you seeing where I'm going with this? Factor in the necessity to take these ingredients to specific places, and what you're left with is an incredibly long fetch quest, which certainly brings that save feature into good use, because, brace yourselves, a single playthrough can last as long as 6 hours based on the RZX Archive walkthrough. And what happens when you beat it? The game loops. No real fanfare, just start it all over again. No thanks. All of this might sound like I'm beating down on the game, and I am of a fashion. I don't particularly like it, if you weren't immediately clear on that. But the main issue I have here is one based on expectation. The move from Manic Miner to Jet Set Willy had the same problem, but Chuckie Egg seems to expand on this tenfold. Inflating the game beyond its core basics doesn't necessarily make for a better game in the long run. Chuckie Egg succeeded because it kept the gameplay loop simple and gradually increased the difficulty for those who could master the game. Chuckie Egg 2 abandons most of the things that made Chuckie Egg a success and opted for something grander in scale, but less precise in its execution. Instead of polishing the core experience everyone loved, the series took a complete left turn. That's not always a bad thing, of course. There are game series that have succeeded in that endeavour, but Chuckie Egg 2, for me, does not. To return to that initial Crash magazine review once more, some games seem on the surface to be no different to other games of the same type, and yet manage in some hard-to-define way to be great. Chuckie Egg succeeded in this. Chuckie Egg 2 feels like an also-ran amongst the Spectrum's many, many titles that do exactly what this game does. It is Fahrenheit 3000, it is Jet Set Willy, and outside the plotline and puzzles, it's rarely anything more than that. Is it a bad game? Not really, but for me it's a monument to bloating a game with ideas beyond those required. It is a world littered with objective markers, but it's missing the finer details to make those objectives entertaining. Go to A, pick up X, go to B. Repeat through levels that don't even begin to spark the imagination. There's a removal of agency in these single-screen affairs where once the game was freeform parkour, requiring you to map out the correct sequence in your head and focusing the game around the player's abilities, now the game is a maze of themed areas that you need to map out, fall damages back on the cards, collecting items in single portions is just blindly laborious, and all in all, it just loses the immediate engagement that the original was built on. There's nothing inherently awful about Chuckie Egg 2, but its name carries the weight of its older brother on its shoulders, and its flaws become all the more apparent. I can understand why they made a Chuckie Egg sequel, because it was a name that had already turned heads, and I can understand why they didn't want to risk doing more of the same. But if your attempt at not making the game the same as the prequel means you end up making a game similar to other games, well, the bet hasn't really paid off. Would I recommend it? Not if you're looking for more Chuckie Egg, but if you're looking for more of the Jet Set Willy style of explorative platformer, you could do worse. And that pretty much sums up my feelings on the sequel. It could be worse, but I so wish it could have been better.